The Klingon bird of prey should not exist. Now, before you close this video, hear me out first. I promise this isn't some weird hate video for the bird of prey, but rather an analysis of its history and pointing out how weird Star Trek canon can be. You know, 60-year-old franchise problems. Well, almost 60. Star Trek's not quite there yet. Anyway, one of the major reasons why I have this opinion is that, well, Star Trek seemed to kind of forget that someone else already had a bird of prey. So let's start this out with a little bit of history. Not with the Klingon bird of prey, but with the version that showed up first, the Romulan bird of prey. In September of 1966, Star Trek aired its 10th episode, Balance of Terror.
More like episode 9, loser! In your face, victory is mine!
This episode introduced the Romulans, and in it was noted that the Romulan ships could be easily identified by having the image of a bird of prey printed on their hull, hence why it was called a Romulan bird of prey. Now fast forward to 1984 and the premiere of Star Trek III: The Search for Spock, where Star Trek is now into the third installment of its movie franchise days. This is where we first see the Klingon bird of prey. After its debut in Star Trek III, the Klingon bird of prey would go on to make significant appearances in Star Trek's 4, 5, 6 generations, as well as make numerous appearances in The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine. But this still leaves the question of, if the original bird of prey was a Romulan ship, why was it suddenly turned into a Klingon ship? This can actually be answered pretty easily by looking at earlier drafts of Star Trek III's script, because the villain that would become Commander Kruge was originally written to be a Romulan. This early Romulan version of the character was described as a handsome, swarthy man with the dignity reminiscent of 20th century actor Omar Sharif. He's also described as the captain of a spy ship, which means we likely would have seen an updated version of the old Romulan bird of prey. However, later versions of the script would change the character from a Romulan to a Klingon. From what I understand, this was largely just because the Klingons were more popular in Star Trek than the Romulans. Throughout the original series, the Klingons were always viewed as the big antagonist to the Federation, whereas at this point in time, the Romulans had only appeared in 2 episodes. So the character was altered for the sake of brand recognition. Later drafts would include Commander Kruge commanding a Romulan bird of prey, and implying that he stole it from the Romulans. But then there were worries that Klingons commanding a Romulan ship could somehow be confusing to viewers. You know, because movie producers always think the average movie viewer is a complete moron. So the ship was changed to a Klingon ship, but they didn't bother to change the name. They still called it the Bird of Prey. I'm guessing they kept this because the term Bird of Prey still had some recognition for Star Trek fans because, I mean, Balance of Terror was still a very popular episode. So popular, they made it twice. So we know the behind-the-scenes reasons. Star Trek III's villain was supposed to be a Romulan originally, but then it was changed to Klingons because they were seen as more popular, but the movie script still required a ship with a cloaking device. And thus the Klingon bird of prey was born. But looking at it from an in-universe perspective, it's kind of weird to have 2 different alien races both having a ship called the Bird of Prey. Although if you looked into it far enough, there were some conclusions that you could draw to kind of explain this. Remember earlier when I said the Romulans had only appeared in 2 episodes of the original series? The second one was called the Enterprise Incident, which was the 4th episode of the 3rd season. In this episode, there's a mention of an alliance between the Klingon Empire and the Romulan Star Empire, in which involves some exchange of technologies between the 2 powers. This is used to explain why Romulans are flying Klingon D-7 battlecruisers in the episode. So the Romulans got the design for the D-7 from the Klingons, but it's never explained what the Klingons got out of the exchange. But when Star Trek III came out 15 years later, it became easy to assume that the Klingons got cloaking technology out of this deal. And possibly designs for the Bird of Prey as well. Or at the very least, they got enough to make their own version of the Bird of Prey. Though it still seems weird to me that the Klingons would still call it the Bird of Prey and not something, you know, more Klingon sounding. But, you know, it was the 80s. The Next Generation hadn't even premiered yet, so there was a lot less Klingon and Romulan lore to deal with. So while it was never mentioned in canon, this link to the Enterprise incident was the common fan theory among the fans, and was even embraced by some non-canon licensed Star Trek material, like the old books. By the time the Romulans were introduced into The Next Generation, Star Trek had seemingly abandoned the idea of a Romulan bird of prey, because instead of introducing a small scout ship that's reminiscent of World War II submarines like they did in the original series, The Next Generation reintroduces the Romulans commanding a massive battleship called the Romulan Warbird. This would appear to be the new standard for the Romulans, as the Warbird would be used throughout the rest of The Next Generation, as well as Deep Space Nine, make a few appearances in Voyager, and the later ships that were built by Romulus and or Remus would also be referred to as Warbirds. So at this point, it was pretty clear that the bird of prey was now going to be exclusively a Klingon thing, whereas the Romulans had seemingly moved on to the Romulan warbird. Which, to me, seemed like a pretty good trade, because the Romulan warbird was the coolest alien ship in Star Trek, which is a hill I am prepared to die on. In fact, it was even a reasonable conclusion to think that Star Trek had decided to retcon the Romulan bird of prey entirely, because a Romulan bird of prey was never mentioned again throughout the entirety of The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, or any of the movies. Though, of course, it didn't stay that way because things start getting weird when Star Trek Enterprise shows up. Because not only does Enterprise introduce its own version of the Klingon bird of prey, but it also gives us its own version of the Romulan bird of prey. So not only are we once again acknowledging the Romulan bird of prey, but now the Klingons and the Romulans both have one at the same time. The weirdness continues into the newer shows because Star Trek Discovery introduces its own version of the Klingon bird of prey. It also gives Klingons cloaking technology about a decade before the Enterprise incident, so that original fan theory about Klingons getting the cloaking technology from the Romulans, that's out the window. Then in Season 1 of Star Trek Picard, which takes place in 2399, they introduce an updated version of the Romulan bird of prey, though it's not referred to as a new class of bird of prey, it's actually referred to as an old antique, implying this is meant to be the same class of ship that Kirk faced in Balance of Terror. This is later confirmed in the Strange New Worlds episode, A Quality of Mercy, because they use the same model that was used in Picard. Star Trek Lower Decks also features the Romulan bird of prey in the episode Veritas, but they used the original Romulan bird of prey, not the updated version from Picard. So, we've gone from the Romulan bird of prey being this minor, obscure ship that only appeared in 2 episodes of the original series, to being all over the place, because not only do we finally acknowledge the existence of the Romulan bird of prey in the 24th century, thanks to Picard and Lower Decks, but now we've also got 2 new versions of the ship. Though technically the one from Picard and Strange New Worlds is meant to be a visual update to the original design, while the one from Star Trek Enterprise is meant to be a totally different bird of prey that existed about 100 years before that. So, my point is that the bird of prey was meant to be a Romulan thing, but then it was given to the Klingons, so the Romulans got a new thing, they got the warbird. But then with Star Trek Enterprise, now we have both a Klingon and Romulan bird of prey existing at the same time. And it makes no sense. How do 2 different alien species come up with the same name for a ship? There are 2 in-universe explanations that I can think of, and honestly it's really easy to poke holes in both of them. The first is that there could have been previous exchanges of technologies between the Klingons and Romulans, thus giving the Klingons the idea for their own bird of prey much earlier than Star Trek III. The Klingon and Romulan empires existed long before Earth started making its way into deep space, so who knows what those 2 got up to in the meantime. However, given the very secretive and xenophobic nature of the Romulans, any sort of cooperation between them and the Klingons that early seems very unlikely. The whole reason that the Klingons and Romulans allied in the Enterprise incident was because of the Federation. But if the Federation wasn't a thing yet, I can't imagine anything else that would bring those 2 powers together like that. The other idea I had is that one of them possibly stole the idea of the bird of prey from the other. This one has a bit more validity. You could easily say that the Klingons stole a Romulan bird of prey in battle and then dismantled it and then incorporated the technology into their own fleet. In fact, a lot of that almost ended up being part of Star Trek III. But at the same time, there's just never been any indication that there's been much contact between the Klingons and Romulans at this point in time. In fact, throughout Star Trek Enterprise, I don't think one ever even acknowledges the other. We know the 2 get much more involved in the later shows because, like I said earlier, there's the alliance from the Enterprise incident in the original series, and then by the Next Generation they have what Worf describes as a blood feud with each other, after events like Narendra 3 and the Kittimer Massacre. But all of these events also, in some way or another, involve the Federation. So again, with no Federation, I can't imagine there was much talk going on between the Klingons and Romulans. So it goes back to, why are both of them using a ship called the Bird of Prey at the same time? I really wish I had some answers to this, but honestly I only have more questions because things get weirder as we look more into this. Because not only did the Klingons take the Bird of Prey from the Romulans, they tried to do it to the Warbird as well. In the first episode of Star Trek Enterprise, Broken Bow, in the scene where they're talking about the Klingon who had crash-landed on Earth after being chased by the Suliban, who was then shot by that farmer, one of the Vulcan ambassadors makes a comment about the threat of Klingon warbirds, and how Earth wouldn't stand a chance against a fleet of them. Now, it was later confirmed that this was actually a script error, that the line was supposed to be Klingon birds of prey, but it wouldn't be the last time that the term Klingon warbird comes up, because in the 2009 reboot movie, during the scene where they're doing the Kobayashi Maru simulation, everyone participating in the simulation refers to the Klingon battlecruisers as Klingon warbirds. So yet another Romulan ship designation just given to the Klingons, this one done even more arbitrarily than the last one. Going back to Star Trek Enterprise, there is one more ship I also want to talk about. the Klingon Raptor. The Klingon Raptor's first and only appearance, not counting background computer display images, was in the episode Sleeping Dogs, which was about halfway into Star Trek Enterprise's first season. The existence of this ship has always puzzled me as well for two different reasons. One, it's presented as a scout ship, which is weird because I thought that was the Klingon Bird of Prey's job. Well, one of its jobs. But the other big reason is because of its name, Raptor. It just always seemed weird to me that the Klingons would get a ship called Raptor, especially when you got the Vulcans out here referring to the Romulans as those who flew beneath the Raptor's wings. So, I guess the big final question to ask in all of this is, what is with Star Trek producers constantly giving the Romulans bird motif to the Klingons? I wish I had a proper conclusion to this video, but I don't. You know, like an interview from one of the producers saying, well, yeah, we screwed that up, our bad. Or some fan theory that could explain why there's so much back and forth between the Klingons and Romulans like this. Like, maybe the Klingons have been stealing from the Romulans for years, and it all kind of boiled to a head, and that's what led to events like Narendra 3 and the Kittimer Massacre. Actually, that's not bad. I should write that down. But yeah, sadly, I don't have any of that. All you can really say on the matter is that this is just the result of writers and producers messing around with canon because either they didn't know any better or just because they can. We'll never get a firm example out of this. This is just another example of how weird Star Trek canon can be at times. Like I said at the beginning of the video, 60-year-old franchise problems.